Hey guys, I'm Georgia and welcome back for another episode in my mystery series, or if you're new here, welcome. Recently, I asked on my community page for any case requests that you guys had, and one of my wonderful viewers wrote a paragraph all about this case that we're covering today, one that I'd never actually heard of before and I couldn't not immediately add it to the top of my list. Today we're going to be talking about multiple cases in one, multiple missing people and two unidentified does, whose stories all intertwine in a very intriguing way. All of these people deserve to be found, whether that's physically or just being reunited with their identities. This story begins with lovers, 18-year-old Mike Lawrence Griffin and 14-year-old Donis Marie Redman, who was known by everyone as her nickname of Pinky. Yes, they were lovers. Yes, a very questionable age gap by 2023 standards, but that's likely not relevant to the story I'm going to be sharing. This all took place back in 1958. The pair, Mike and Pinky, were last seen together on the 1st of March 1958, either in their hometown of San Pedro in Los Angeles County, California, or in Las Vegas, depending on the source. In all honesty, this is not a case that's been particularly well covered, neither in recent years nor at the time they disappeared, so facts here are kind of scraped together from across the internet, where speculation seems to be much more prevalent than facts. It has been speculated that the pair were travelling to Vegas in order to elope, but we don't know that for sure. What we do know for sure is that they were never seen or heard from again. Whilst this general consensus online does seem to be that the pair went to elope, we don't know why this would have been or why they wanted to get married so young. I can't substantiate this fact at all, but it must have come from somewhere. There are no marriage records for Mike and Pinky though, so if that was their intention, they never got that far, they never actually got married. Or if they did, they used false identities to do so. And I will assume that false identities may have been a possibility, because in 1950, the legal age of marriage without parental consent in Nevada was 18 years old, whilst it was 16 with parental consent. Pinky at 14 just wasn't old enough to get married. Mike was born around 1940, making him 18 years old. He was a white male, 5'3" and 120 pounds. He had auburn hair with hazel eyes, and in terms of any sort of distinguishing features, Doe Network writes his teeth had been straightened through orthodontia, which I'm taking to mean he had braces at one point. 2 or more teeth may have been removed to aid in this alignment. Pinky was born on the 10th of June 1943, which is actually the same day I was born. Irrelevant to the case, but it does always give you that extra sense of connection to a victim when you have something in common with them. I must say, it's a great day to have a birthday. She was a white female, 5'3" and 105 pounds with strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes. Doe Network doesn't state any sort of distinguishing marks or features. She was last seen wearing brown capri pants and a yellow sweater. Dentals and fingerprints are not available for either Mike or Pinky, but apparently they do have DNA, which could potentially be used for comparison if a body or potential match is ever found. This Doe Network page states that it was last updated in August of last year, 2022, so I will assume all of this is the most up-to-date information available. The pair are classed as endangered missing. The only really concrete fact in this case is that a few days after their disappearance, Mike's car, a 1950 or 1951 Dodge Clipper, was found. The drive from San Pedro to Las Vegas is 288 miles today, which Google Maps tells me will take 4 hours and 38 minutes via Interstate 15. And luckily for Mike and Pinky, the road had finished construction just the previous year. So they probably chose to go that route, but had they not chosen to drive down the interstate, there were multiple other route choices through the endless desert. Maybe nothing else as direct as the interstate, but they might have wanted to explore, make it a proper road trip. They were teenagers at the end of the day. Obviously, I have never driven these roads, especially never driven these roads in the 1950s, so I can't tell you firsthand what they were like. But luckily, there are multiple people in the comments on Reddit threads dedicated to this case, sharing their own experiences. Again, not necessarily from the 1950s, but from the decades after. Apparently these roads were quiet, desolate, you could drive for miles without seeing any other cars. There was also a very steep hill on this route from LA to Las Vegas, which was pretty rough on older cars, causing a lot of people to break down. Is this what potentially happened to Mike and Pinky, causing them to pull over at the side of the road and flag down help from someone nefarious? whether that be mechanical help or just deciding to abandon the car and hitchhike a lift to their destination. But interestingly, Mike's car wasn't found on the side of any road between San Pedro and Las Vegas. The car was found in Williams, Arizona, which is the other side of Vegas, 220 miles southeast to be exact. That's a further 3 hours and 21 minutes on. How did it end up there? There are a number of theories here. Perhaps they never went to Vegas at all, but instead had another destination in mind and ended up in Williams. Maybe they did make it to Vegas, got married, and decided to carry on with their journey. Some speculate they got hijacked, and the hijackers are the ones who took it to Williams. Mike and Pinky ended up just walking through the desert until they eventually disappeared and maybe died. Maybe it broke down, Mike and Pinky hitchhiked with somebody else, and eventually somebody came across the car on the side of the road, got it working, and stole it, taking it to Williams. In the meantime, maybe the person who picked up Mike and Pinky killed them for whatever reason. That last theory would kind of rely on them coming across two criminals, one person who wanted to kill them for whatever reason and another person deciding to steal their car. Just incredibly bad luck. That's why in my mind the possibility of a hijacking is probably more likely, leaving them stranded on the side of this deserted road. Some others think that Mike and Pinky had a plan though, that they drove all the way to Williams, abandoned their car and got a new one, that all of this was planned out, that they intended to run away. Now, we might be able to lend more credence to this possibility if we knew what the pair's home lives were like, if we knew a reason why they might have wanted to start anew. But we don't. It is, again, just speculation. But if that was the case, maybe even now Mike and Pinky are living somewhere under new names, new identities. Maybe they just wanted to get away and they've done that incredibly successfully. They could still be alive today with a whole family who might not know their secret. That was the thing about going missing in the mid-20th century. It was a lot easier to do with no digital footprint. It was harder to spread the word about things like this. But maybe that's me looking at the case with rose-tinted glasses, because what is much more likely is that something bad happened to the couple. Their bodies were disposed of somewhere in the vast deserts around Las Vegas, maybe even somewhere in the Grand Canyon. There are so many places to dispose of a body in this area, and you probably remain pretty confident that it would never be found, especially in the 1950s. And Mike and Pinky have never been found. However, almost 8 months later, on Halloween, the 31st of October 1958, the body of a young girl was found in Coconino County in Arizona, about 10 miles southeast of the Grand Canyon, quite near Williams. The body was completely skeletonized after likely sitting out in the Arizona heat all summer, and it was speculated that Jane Doe had been there for at least 9 months, maybe as long as 18 months. Due to the level of decomposition, the coroner was unable to determine how the victim had died, but it was concluded that it was homicide. I can't tell you exactly why that is. She was given the name of Little Miss X. It's thought that Little Miss X was around 5 foot to 5'3" and weighed approximately 105 pounds with reddish or dark brown hair that had been lightened very slightly. She may have had a perm, with the hair being slightly wavy. It was believed at the time she may have been of Native American or Latin descent and was thought to be between 11 and 17 years old, although NamUs does say 11 to 14. It was clear that this girl took regular trips to the dentist. She had 7 fillings in 4 teeth, so she was clearly very conscious of her well-being. The body was found nude, but a number of interesting items would later be found nearby, including some items of clothing. A white wool short-sleeve cardigan, brown, green and red capri pants in the brand Graf California wear, white rayon underpants and a Maidenform Alouette white cotton bra in the size 34C. I did see a couple of sources say that the clothes might not have been the right size for Little Miss X, but if that's the case, who did the clothes belong to? Why were they there? Other personal items were also found, including a gold chain necklace, a small jar of Pond's cold cream, a white nylon comb, a small white powder puff with traces of suntan coloured powder, and a small blue plastic nail file case with the indentation of the letter P and a hand-printed capital R written next to it. All of this paints a picture of a teenage girl who is potentially coming into womanhood, taking great care to look after herself and her appearance. These aren't the belongings nor the outfit of somebody who would be wandering the desert for whatever reason. I couldn't find any information as to whether the authorities believed that she had died where she was found or if the body was potentially placed there later, but perhaps it is safe to assume that the body was placed there by somebody who didn't want it found. None of the belongings suggested this was somebody who was just wandering the desert for whatever reason, unless perhaps she had been hijacked. You're probably thinking that Little Miss X sounds like a good candidate as to being Pinky, hence why I'm connecting them in this video. Little Miss X was petite and about the right age, but she wasn't found with the exact clothes Pinky was wearing when she disappeared. However, of course, she could have changed. And then there's the plastic nail file case with the initials PR, Pinky Redman. Is this too much of a coincidence to be true? Of course, Pinky was just a nickname, her name was Donis, but it certainly seems like this is a name that everyone knew her by. If she was to get her initials on something, would she be PR or DR? But then there's also a question as to whether the PR were intended to be initials at all. The P was already engraved on the case, but the R looked like it had kind of been scratched in apparently. Was the P maybe a brand logo, or was the case second hand and the second owner scratched in the R? There's too many questions to connect this sort of undoubtedly to Pinky. Then, of course, there's doubt as to whether these items belonged to Little Miss X at all. Investigators were never able to confirm that they definitely did. As I said, the clothing certainly seemed to be for the wrong size, and we don't know how close these items were found. Plus, you've got the fact that Pinky is described as Caucasian, whilst Little Miss X is likely of Latin or Native American descent. Pinky had strawberry blonde hair, whilst Little Miss X was more auburn, so there's obvious discrepancies there, but it could just be that investigators got these facts wrong all the way back in the 1950s. Maybe all of this points to a wider problem though. Maybe this points to young girls around this age going missing in Arizona. Was the same person maybe responsible for both, for Little Miss X and for Pinky? Another girl called Mary Begay also went missing around this time in the Grand Canyon area. Mary was 20 years old and she was Native American, a member of the Navajo Nation with brown hair and brown eyes. She was 5'2" to 5'5", 100 to 120 pounds, and was last seen at Grand Canyon National Park in August 1957, just over a year before Little Miss X was found, and possibly the right time frame to be a candidate. Mary was last seen leaving the Grand Canyon Inn where she'd had drinks with friends, and she was seen getting into a vehicle with two men. Then she disappeared. When she didn't turn up for work again, the Grand Canyon fired her and boxed up all her belongings in the employee house, and they just moved on. It seems crazy they wouldn't look into this any deeper. It was only realised that something more nefarious was going on when her family came to visit and she was nowhere to be found. Her family reported Mary's disappearance to the Navajo Nation authorities, but the Coconino County Sheriff's Office wasn't notified for another year. While some do think that Mary ran away to start a new life, the police at the time didn't think this was very likely. She always remained in constant contact with her family, and she just stopped. Could Mary be Little Miss X? Mary was a little bit older than the authorities thought Little Miss X was, but that doesn't necessarily mean it can't be her. According to the AZ Daily Sun, her clothes were similar, and there was the gold necklace which might have belonged to Mary. Mary's sister did later provide a DNA sample, and investigators tried to get DNA from a hair follicle of Little Miss X, but they weren't successful in matching anything. They couldn't get the DNA. Another possible candidate for Little Miss X though was Constance Connie Smith, a 10-year-old girl who went missing in July 1952. She was 5 foot, 85 pounds, white with light brown hair and blue eyes. The Charlie Project notes that despite being just 10 years old, she was well developed for her age, and many thought she looked older than her age. She was very tanned at the time of her disappearance as well, so despite being white, she may well have been mistaken for being native or of Latin descent. She had a slight scar under her right nostril. I saw Connie's name connected with this case multiple times, so I assumed that she also disappeared in Arizona, but it doesn't look like she did. Connie actually went missing from Salisbury in Connecticut, which is kind of the other end of the country, although she was from Wyoming, which is closer to Arizona. Connie was spending her summer at a camp in Connecticut, and on the morning of July 16th, 1952, she had an altercation with some of her campmates, in which she ended up with a bloodied nose. Connie told her tent mates that she was going to skip breakfast that morning. Instead, she wanted to walk to the camp dispensary to drop an ice pack back that she borrowed, but instead, she just walked out of the camp and down Indian Mountain Road, last being seen picking daisies along the roadside and asking people how she could get to Lakeville, which was the nearest town. Connie apparently was homesick and wanted to go home to Wyoming. Perhaps she decided to hitchhike. Weirdly, Connie's mother had just visited her at camp just a couple of days beforehand, and Connie said she was enjoying it, even asking her mother if she could stay longer. So what had changed so much in 2 days? Perhaps her walking out was just a whim, not something she planned or thought through. She was 10 years old, so I doubt she fully thought through what she was doing, but she'd had an argument with her campmates that morning and just wanted to go. Connie was last seen walking on US Route 44 in Salisbury, and I've just realised I'm pronouncing Salisbury as it's pronounced here in the UK, but I know in America sometimes pronunciations are different, so it might be Salisbury over there. I should have probably checked that before I started filming. She was last seen on US Route 44, thumb out, attempting to hitchhike. She didn't have any money or any extra clothes on her, she left literally everything behind, and then she was never seen again. If Connie was indeed attempting to hitchhike all the way back home to Wyoming, this suggests that she could have been killed at any point between Connecticut and Wyoming. Arizona isn't exactly on their route home, she wouldn't have had to really pass through the state at all if she was travelling directly, but we don't know if she was travelling directly. Could she have been Little Miss X? It seems they very much did look into this possibility very seriously, with a dental surgeon and a pathologist both ruling out the possibility. Although there have been many suspects over the years in Connie's disappearance, no one has ever been charged with anything. She did disappear all the way back in 1952, making this seem like it was a super old case, but her dad actually only died back in 2012, only a decade ago. Connie herself would be 80 years old now. So is she Miss X? I must admit it does seem unlikely, but I wanted to mention her and her story in this video anyway, because no harm will come of making people more aware of her case. In terms of movements and identifying Little Miss X today, as of a 2014 AZ Daily Sun article, it said that DNA was found on the gold necklace found near the body. That seems like the key to solving this case. I'm assuming this DNA is thought to be that of Little Miss X, but of course it could be that of the possible killers as well. I couldn't find any more information on this. There's also the aforementioned possibility of getting DNA from her hair follicles, which is something I assume investigators still do have on hand. Perhaps when this testing was first done, the forensic tech wasn't quite there yet, but as the years go on, maybe it will get there, maybe it's already there. If they were able to find the boy in the box, Joseph Zarelli's identity, from DNA that was said to be like confetti, surely they'd be able to get it here. Sadly though, I don't think this case will have as much funding as The Boy in the Box, which really was one of America's most well-known unsolved cases. I really hope the Coconino County Sheriff's Office get in contact with either the DNA Doe Project or Othram or maybe Identifinders in regards to this case if they haven't already. I couldn't find anything in reference to the case on any of those websites, but I guess this could take a while. They definitely haven't given up on finding her identity though, there's updates here as recently as 2018. However, she was exhumed back in 1962 for further examination, and no records exist as to where exactly she was reburied, as she is commonly thought of as being lost, at least publicly. I don't know if investigators know where she is. So it does seem they have some of her hair on file at least for DNA testing, but if they use all that up, we won't know where to look for her again. According to a post on Reddit from 7 years ago from user Nico Atsumi Chick, she's likely buried in Citizen Cemetery in Flagstaff, Arizona, but that's somewhat of a potter's field, without markers or a list of who's buried where. It's a bit like searching for a needle in a haystack. Regardless, I do hold full hope that maybe one day we will get Little Miss X's identity. Maybe she is one of the girls I've mentioned today. Maybe she's someone else entirely. I just hope we find out one day. In terms of Mike Griffin's location, there was actually quite a big movement in his case just over a decade ago. So in 2001, some unidentified skeletal remains were found in the attic of a funeral home. How they ended up there is a mystery. I don't know how long they'd been there or why a funeral home would stick remains in their attic. Seems unethical. But upon this 2001 discovery, the remains were buried in a pauper's grave, like somewhere locally. Around 2010, an Arizona detective got a hunch that these remains could have belonged to Mike Griffin, and he filed a motion to exhume them and test. But sadly, DNA comparisons proved that the remains weren't Mike. However, they do belong to somebody, and clearly they have DNA, so perhaps we will get an identification here at some point. This isn't a particularly high-profile case though, so I don't know if anyone will go to the effort of doing so, or if they do, I don't know if it's something that would necessarily hit the headlines. Hopefully I'm wrong, I'd love to see an update here. And I think that's about all the information I'm going to be able to share with this case, with all of these cases. The case of two missing teenagers, which just became a spider web of possibilities, a spider web of possibly interconnected cases, question after question. I always enjoy researching cases like this, cases that need a light shone on them. And when I first started writing this, I thought I was just going to be writing about Mike and Pinky, but clearly that's not the case. We're kind of all connected, aren't we? It's fascinating. Thank you so much to the person who requested I cover this case. It's one that I feel really needs speaking about more. So if any of my fellow true crime creators also want to talk about this one, please do help us get the word out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.